Welcome to IdeaMix Performance and Wellness, where world-leading coaches and scientists explain how their research can help you achieve your personal and professional goals faster.
Hi, it's Jayanti, co-founder and CEO of IdeaMix Coaching. Coaching's played an important role in my life. It's helped me through my journey to become a powerful leader, mother, and wife. IdeaMix coaches help you increase your self-awareness, improve your problem-solving skills, and evolve your habits to achieve your goals. All things I'm grateful to have learned and done through my own coaching journey. Our easy 1-minute assessment matches you with an IdeaMix coach that best fits your needs and values. Each IdeaMix coach is vetted and experienced and helps clients map and achieve their wellness, professional, and business goals. If you or someone you know could benefit from coaching, visit our website at www.theideamix.com. We also know that not everyone can invest in coaching right now, and that's why we provide free coaching in our Coach Shorts episodes. If you think someone you know would benefit from it, please share our podcast with them. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Welcome to the next episode of Coaching for Performance and Wellness. We're your hosts, Jamie Kosmar
And Sam Jayanti.
And today I'm very excited to be talking about the timely topic of organizational culture in the age of distributed teams. And you know, back in the day when offshoring started, you know, we defined distributed teams in a way that meant you had teams that were not working in the same places because they were working in global locations, and they weren't working together. And today, you know, post-pandemic, we have more and more people working remotely. And so many teams are working not in the same place. And that doesn't mean that they are globally distributed, but it means that they are not working in the same office on a day-to-day basis. So we're now in an age where flexibility is the norm for employees. And we're in a situation where employees expect that to be a benefit that a company is providing, while companies still want employees to go back to the old model. And it's creating this tension between employees and companies, in fact.
It's a real tension, right now. I mean, even if we think about this past 12 months in relation to the past 3 years, the number of people who are back in the office, mostly not 5 days a week, but 4 days a week now, is significant, right? And I think the tension has been between flexibility and productivity, because I think in some instances the productivity loss was meaningful, but I think there seems to be a broad realization that the hybrid is necessary, right?
Mm-hmm. I also think, you know, it's about flexibility. And if we want to get a little granular on it, you know, employees are like, why should I spend my time commuting? Why should I invest in a new wardrobe? Why should I pay for lunch? I have all these outlays of having to go into the office.
Yeah.
And so why is it that I don't get compensated for that, when I have proven to you over the course of this fully remote period for many people, that I can do my job and do it well without having to be in the office to do that?
No, I think it's a really legitimate question. And I think the balance and the tension is, when you are fully remote, how do you form closer relationships with the people that you already know, and new relationships with people that you might be encountering for the first time, right? Like, companies are sort of constantly changing things. I sort of think of them as, you know, when we were all children in school, we sort of used to look at the amoeba moving under the microscope. And that's sort of how I think of companies. They're these constantly changing, evolving, reshaping things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about the people in them reconstituting, evolving roles, changing responsibilities. And I think a fully remote environment makes it very challenging to stay in touch with all of that change, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. How do you bring everybody along? when you are transforming an organization or things are moving, constantly moving. But, I feel like we know and can be pretty confident that the hybrid work environment is here to stay. And while the office-centric model will still be in existence in some form, there is going to have to be a balance between remote and office productivity, and how people are engaging. So in that point, so there's been a lot of challenges that arise from the fact that, we have very abruptly gone from this office-centric model to this distributed model for many people.
Yeah.
Because let's face it too, even if people are coming into the office for 3 or 4 days a week, they're not necessarily coming in all at the same time.
Yes.
And so, I remember talking to a friend of mine who was saying, there's no point in me going to the office because even when we do meetings, I'm still on Zoom because not everybody is there.
Right.
So what's the point in being there?
Right. Right.
So it's grappling with some of those sort of, that perspective. But there are real challenges. And I think the first one that's important to address is how do you transmit work culture in an environment where you're not all in the same place on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, it's the perfect question, right? And I think the short version of the answer is that the leader of each team, each level, throughout an organization now, however small, large, senior, junior that team may be, has acquired even more importance in a sense because that leader is tasked with being the mechanism or the person who really fosters and builds culture for that team and then in turn the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so you basically almost have culture ambassadors now in addition to, managing your team in a traditional way and, basically managing the balance sheet and making sure you're hitting your goals and setting your goals. There are all these additional responsibilities that a leader has to assume in a hybrid or predominantly remote environment.
Yeah.
And I think it's important,
So can I just interject one thing there? I think that the role of leadership has changed in one really fundamental way, which is that a leader today, they've always had their laundry list of ensure profitability and performance and productivity and all those other things. But what's been added to that list now is ensure that each individual on your team is okay, is fully invested, is engaged, and is doing all the things they need to be doing. And that really takes the skills that a leader needs from purely professional, perhaps, to much more having to be a sort of part coach, part therapist, part friend, all the while you're, being the boss or the leader.
Yeah.
And that's challenging.
Yes. I'm really leaning into skills and ideas that are well beyond when, you tend to think of the traditional idea of a leader, like well beyond the skill set that they used to have. And now the remote environment is really demanding, right, that they have this extra set of skills in order to, again, transmit their culture and workplace norms. And what else does that mean? That means, understanding that not everybody on a team is going to feel the impact of being remote equally.
Exactly.
That's not going to be evenly distributed. The example that you were talking about where somebody in their career who is maybe mid-level, they are, in the phase of life where they're having kids, their requirements and needs are very different from a young professional who is, recently out of university and entering into their first job. What they get out of the culture and their learning, what their learning should be and what they need are all going to be very, very different.
Yeah, and each leader as a result has to really in a sense, deliver an individualized experience for each of these people, right? I mean, we talk about customer experience. Every company sort of talks about that, but it's sort of what's the internal employee experience. And I think the leader is really tasked with meeting everyone where they are, in a sense. How is it that this person likes to optimally communicate? What's the frequency? Does this person do well for long periods of time when they don't come into the office? Do they need to come into the office because the long periods of time don't work? Does this person have a strong relationship with one or two members of the team, but not with other members of the team? There's so many parameters that you're having to consider and solve for that leaders really need to evolve their skills to be able to do.
Yes. And the reality is that if they don't, we see lost productivity.
Yeah.
We see lost innovation, and we see basically a loss of engagement amongst employees, and further sort of what we call stickiness, right? Loyalty.
Yeah.
Employees are going to go and find somewhere else where they can get
totally
whatever it is that they need from an employer.
So I think it's really interesting to think about why we are in this place, right? Where most organizations are struggling with a lowering or lack of engagement, a loss of cohesion in their culture, and haven't quite figured out how they're going to fix it. What are your thoughts on how we got here?
I think that at the heart of it, when you have an office-centric model, the transmission of cultures and norms, mentorship, building connection, all happens in a much more organic way.
Right.
And when you take the place out of that culture, you have to be much more intentional about making sure that those bridges are built to then transmit that connection, those cultures, those norms. And that's really, I think, what the modern leader is going to be tasked with, is how do I, in this non-office centric model, in this hybrid world, how do I build these bridges to keep people, to keep talent, to make sure people feel a sense of belonging, to make sure that the young professionals coming into my organization are being mentored and have growth. And it's not just in their technical skills, because the workplace is really important for helping young professionals develop their emotional intelligence as well, which is needed for things like collaboration. And, we think about influence. All those skills are necessary for building a culture and getting things done and maximizing productivity and performance.
Yeah, and I think everyone's needs, the reason this is so complex, it sounds simple in a sense, right? But it's so complex because in any given team, you have people spread across different generations who have observed their parents having different work experiences and have a set of preconceptions about how they want to work and what's good for them at work, right, or in their work life. I think as a leader, you have to see, hear, and acknowledge all of that, right, in this kind of individualized way. And at the same time, think about, what does this person need, right? Because we often ourselves miss things that we need. And that's what mentorship is about, and that's what leadership is about, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Beyond leadership, I think it's important to talk about sort of some of the things that companies have been doing out there to sort of manage the situation of this new world order, shall I say. One of them is technology and the role of technology.
Yeah.
We have so many tools now through which we can connect and communicate, but those have limitations. It's not if you haven't had the chance to be in real life with somebody, what's the level of connection that you can actually build using just remote technologies? Is that as effective at creating that connection? Is when you're launching a project and you're trying to generate ideas of how this project's going to move forward. How many ideas get created on a Zoom meeting versus when you are actually in the room together talking about something? And I mean, part of this I think is about focus as well, right? We're highly distracted these days.
Partly because of the technology and the simple number of tools that we're tasked with using, right?
Exactly. I mean, I think everybody can relate to the fact that you've been on a Zoom meeting and you get like an alert that you've gotten something else, and then your attention gets taken away because, and that is because of technology, that we're getting that sort of those instantaneous alerts. But when you're in the room, when you're in person with people, it's just easier for as a human being, I think, to be present.
100%. And I think, technology in the end is a tool. It's a utility. It's not a substitute for human interaction.
Yeah.
And so it has to be viewed as a supplement and as an enhancement and as a tool, but never as a substitute for. I want to talk about one thing which you brought up earlier, belonging, right? I think so many times, and in the context of our coaching business as well as on this podcast, we talk about belonging, and increasingly I find that, and I don't know if this is your experience too, that companies think of belonging in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yes, obviously, belonging is a very key aspect of somebody from a diverse background being able to integrate and feeling a sense of belonging in an organization or a team. But that sense of belonging is important for everybody, irrespective of who they are, right? And a leader of a team is tasked with creating that sense of belonging for each person. So in a way, it's odd that we talk about it most frequently these days in a DE&I context, when it really should be the entire context or the much broader context of organizations, efficiency, productivity, and culture.
Basically, wearing a wider lens when you think about how do I maximize my team performance? And a critical element of that is creating safety and belonging for every team member. And then now the question becomes is how do I do that if my team is not always in an office working in the same place day to day? How does that work?
So we work so much, right, with leaders, young, old, new, emerging, established. And I think it would be really helpful to give our listeners a perspective on why coaching and possibly assessments too are helpful in this issue that we're talking about of helping leaders navigate remote or distributed teams.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think a good place to start is with assessments and how those tools work as a starting point for coaching. So assessments are really productive. Assessments complement it. I would say when we say assessments, it's not just sitting down and taking a test. It's you sit down, you take this personality test that then creates a sort of what is your personality? What does it look like? Who are you? What motivates you? How do you behave in stressful situations? And so it looks at all these things and creates an output that helps you understand who you are. Because the amazing thing is that we all have this inner monologue that happens all the time. And
I love that term, inner monologue, by the way, but it's so true.
And most of us are not aware of it, right? We don't realize that we're reacting. We don't realize what the narrative is saying in our head. And the beauty of an assessment for the individual that is taking it is it tells you about that inner monologue, right? It gives you a deeper understanding of what your inner monologue sounds like in certain situations, and then how you act on that inner monologue.
And where it's productive and where it's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think the way to think about assessments is they're a point in time picture to help each of us understand where we're at. It doesn't mean that they're fixed or set in stone. They're ever changing. But it gives you a point in time data point effectively.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we should definitely talk about the fact that these personality assessments are really gauging a moment, and it is not fixed.
Right.
Right. It doesn't say this is who you are. This may be naturally how you show up in this situation. But this is where the coaching comes in, because it could say, this is how you naturally show up. But given your role, maybe you should be showing up more this way, or you should learn to show up more in these situations this way. And with the help of coaching, so once you get the assessment, a coach can help you develop those goals and work towards them.
Yeah, I really think in the end, coaching is a really effective individualized learning and development tool. The assessments serve as a jumping off point for that learning and development process. And so when you think about leaders and apply it to leaders at any level, every leader comes in with a set of skills that they've learned and honed. And those skills that have been learned and honed in the process of getting to that leadership position are in fact quite different from the skills that they need to manage that team effectively going forward, right? And that's where the skills evolution piece and the learning and development that comes from coaching is really key.
Yeah. And I mean, as a leader, for example, you can understand that in these certain situations, you're reacting this way. And it could be possibly, there's not just one solution. One is you get coaching to help you sort of evolve those skills so that you can show up in ways that your team needs to maximize their performance. The other way is, okay, so how can I think about building out my team so that maybe these skills that I'm not as strong in, I have somebody who's beside me who is strong, and like, how do I do that? I mean, so there's paths to use those in ways that are quite constructive for building out their leadership teams.
100%. 100%. And I think assessments and coaching, as we see in our business, have acquired greater importance as a result of distributed teams, right? Because people need more scaffolding and support, and at the same time, leaders need data and a learning and development methodology that they can use for themselves as well as with their team members to kind of unite people around a common vision and then be able to execute on those plans.
Yeah. I mean, I also think just in general, the assessment itself can understand your team in a more granular fashion, right? So you can get down and who they are and why maybe they react a certain way in certain situations. Yeah. Because you as the leader aren't always going to know that or pick up on that as well. And so having that insight into your team, can help you figure out how you communicate messages, for example, or how you pair people up to work on projects. So I fundamentally believe that doing an assessment, having a baseline of data, driving self-awareness among your team as well as for you as their leader is very helpful, and even more helpful in this age when we are not necessarily in the office every day, working side by side and connecting in the ways that we used to.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us today. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe wherever you listen and leave us a review. Find your ideal coach at www.theideamix.com. Special thanks to our producer, Martin Maluski, and singer-songwriter Doug Allen.